Hello and welcome to the 100 and oh gosh, I've lost track. It's either 4th or 5th. I want to say it's 104th dev update. With me today, we have two very special guests. We have Cheese Enthusiast and Armenio. How you guys doing today?
Doing pretty well.
Yeah, doing good.
Fantastic. So the reason I have you guys on today is because successfully is because we called Joe out on the AMA this week, and then Joe committed himself even further by putting a tweet out that he was going to be here. in Cheese, we just bugged the hell out of him in Telegram until he finally decided to show up. So very successful here. I feel like we're very it's very rare to have three people on the screen from Ergo at once, especially in this case. So hot talk of town lately is Lithos. So let me start off by asking you guys, what are your roles in Lithos? Let's not get into what Lithos is yet. Let's talk about what your roles are in Lithos and who else is involved that might have skipped out on us tonight.
Yeah. So I'm going to be the main developer of Lithos. I'll be developing the protocol, the client, the smart contracts, all the fun stuff, I guess.
Yeah, and cheese isn't free, right? So I mean, it's just true. Cheese has done a great job over the years, showing up, building things around the community, and so more or less a sponsor, right? Helping him take the time and energy it takes to build this type of system. It's a lot of work.
And Joe, you've had some history in the mining sphere, at least since early crypto times, right?
Yeah, I've had rigs on and off. Nowadays, much less involved, but I've always been a fan of proof of work as money. That's kind of its own side adventure. But in terms of like some of the monetary properties proof of work brings to the table, specifically having energy input, I think creates a more stable and interesting use case to build currency on top of. I know that's one of the biggest, let's say, counter marketing narratives that's used. Proof of work, it uses energy. Well, energy is the basis of civilization, right? And so whatever excess energy can be directed and stored in some digital form is a really fascinating use case for money. So that's kind of why I'm here.
That's a great way to put it, Joe. All right, let me ask you right from the beginning, how did Ergo start? Some people don't know how Ergo started out with mining and how it wasn't always pools, correct? Is that what I understand?
Yeah, so the initial design was use non-outsourceable puzzles to try to force everybody to kind of solo mine, right? Which it was interesting because at the time, basically there's kind of an economic use of pooling, right? That's why it came about, is that as hash rate grows on a network, smaller participants can then band together, form their own little collective, and be competitive. So the initial goal of Ergo was to try to create a more democratic mining system. That's part of why we have all these governance parameters. Is to try to actually create some sort of proof of work system that was really miner led. I can't say that we've totally succeeded in that, but nonetheless, the base tooling is still there.
So then, as I understand, Cheese, what happened is that people figured out how to do mining pools and band together with smart contracts that were available on Ergo?
Yeah, so through smart contracts, you can create something that's called a collateralized mining pool, and you can essentially do some tricks sort of to get around this mining pool restriction that was there on the first version of Autolycos. So people were able to get around the pooling restriction, and they created these smart contract pools that were able to pull together hash rate and distribute the ERG to people according to the work, right?
And was there ever a point in time at that point where there was a risk of some sort of 51% attack or anything like that, where the pool organized a majority of the hash rate and then could steer the direction of the chain?
Well, that I'm not too sure of. There might have been a risk at that point. I'm not sure about what the hash rate portion was at the time, but regardless, any sort of pooling does have some sort of risk involved with it.
All right, so
We're
then you
s-
got. Sorry, go for it.
as I was going to say, we're seeing a lot of that across proof of work, where if you look at a lot of proof of work chains, the hash rate is not so distributed, which is sad to see. I'll use Lithium as a good example. They have hash rate dominance in one pool, and actually when I first started more publicly doing stuff, that was one of the first things I was trying to counter in the Ergo ecosystem. Was I was chasing around these pools trying to get support, that way we could distribute the hash rate, because just saying please mine somewhere else just wasn't
Oh, what a
working.
tough plea! I know.
Yeah, no, it wasn't working. So I was like, well, the best thing I can do is create more competition, right? And hopefully some mining pool will have faster ping times or better shares or better payouts or something, and just use more of the competitive side versus like begging.
Did it work?
It did work. I think when I started, Nanopool was pretty dominant. I think at one point it had 67% of the hash rate, 68% of the hash rate. Yeah, not pretty. And so went around chasing all the different mining pools that I could.
So how did voting work back in the day when nowadays you can join a pool that has a large hash rate, and if they support what you're supporting, essentially, you join them if they're supporting whatever change is being promoted there, and your hash rate combines and you have essentially a larger vote as a pool. How did that work before pooling? I mean, if I have like a 3090 and I'm pulling in 275 mega hash, and somebody else has like 10 Radeon 7s, that's going to be like 3000 mega hash that they're going to be pulling in. They definitely have more sway than me, correct?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it worked in essentially the same way as it does now, in that the point is that the people who have the nodes, the people who are producing the blocks, are the ones who vote, right? So back then, when everybody was solo mining, everybody who mined had a node, and they were all able to manually change the voting parameters themselves according to whatever they believed in. Nowadays, the only people who are running nodes to mine are pools and solo miners, and obviously pools have much bigger amount of hash rate, right? So nowadays, the pools are the one that are majority controlling the vote because most people are mining to them.
Gotcha. Gotcha. All right. So one more question before we dive into Lithos, and these are staged questions on purpose that I just thought of this second. So don't think I planned this at all. Um, for payouts, I understand there are a couple different methods of payouts that GitBlock did PPLNS, I believe, right? Was that the new one? And then you started out with something before that as well that was a little slower in payment. What are those methods of payouts that are used by pools?
Yeah, so there's a few different methods. There's like pay per share, pay per last end shares. Really, the whole point of these different payout methods is just to figure out a way to assign a value to an amount of work that someone put in. And all these different methods have different sort of little things about them that change how the payout works. For example, some people use pay per share, but they don't like that. But I mean, other pools don't like that because then people can pool hop and hop to different pools and maybe game the system in that way. So then there's also PPLNS, which is pay per last end shares, and that's to prevent pool hopping. So really, there's a lot of these different payment methods, but in the end, the important part is figuring out how to assign a certain amount of value to the work that someone put into the blocks that they were producing.
And from running the SIGs mining pool, at least in the back end, by default, mining cores seem, or at least with Ergo, Mining Core seems to wait until I believe 720 block confirmations before it actually does a payout after. So there's a couple hours to confirm that you've mined the block, and then there's about 720 blocks until it actually pays it out. Now, from what I understand, on these larger pools that have the capital, they can essentially pay out when the block is won, and then out of their own bank, and then collect the money later. So they can offer some sort of faster incentive of payout compared to like the small guy who's just paying what's coming along kind of thing.
Yeah, that's true. They use sort of like a cushion of money, sort of, to pay out people before the block is fully confirmed, and then they receive the block payment back afterwards.
Interesting. All right, let's dive in. I think I've pre-questioned enough there. What is Lithos? Where'd it come from? And let's start with that.
Big question. Okay. So Lithos is a protocol to create a fully decentralized mining pool. And by fully decentralized, I mean decentralized in as many aspects as possible. So the three main things to really look at here is that block production is made by the miners who mine to the pool. It's not made by the pool owners. The next thing is that payouts are calculated via smart contracts, and they're distributed fairly to the miners according to the work they created. Then lastly, there's a sort of censorship resistant feature in terms of what transactions are allowed onto the blockchain. Specifically, miners who mine blocks on the pool, they'll be able to choose what transactions they want inside the blocks that they mine.
Okay. All right. So let's put that on pause for a second, Cheese. Joe.
Yeah.
What about that concept made you think, "Hey, I'm going to throw some fucking money at this. This is
Okay,
something
well-
I don't want to throw money at."
Well, let's look at trustlessness firsthand, right? When I was mining, you submit your shares. You hope you're getting it. You hope they're calculating it right.
Yeah.
You hope they're paying right.
Yeah, I mean, even when it was good at GitBlock, and you're sure you're getting paid right, you'd still have so many people jumping in chat asking that question.
Yeah.
Cheese, I remember
Yeah. I
that.
mean,
Absolutely crazy.
That's an open and fair question because oftentimes it's based on things you can't see.
Yep.
Right. I've seen plenty of mining pools that spun up, and then they stopped paying their miners. Right. That's happened even on Ergo. There's been a couple of little pools that are like, hey, join us. We're part of the community. They'll hit a few blocks, pay nobody in rug, right? And who knows? Maybe they're still bouncing out around in the crypto space, just changing their logo and their website and, basically feeding off everybody else. Then we also have this question in terms of censorship resistant, which is really important, right? The idea of having, let's call them fair race conditions, is really important to try to protect and maintain. Otherwise, you do not have, let's say, a globally open system, right? So as soon as you have a decent pool that's censoring transactions from a certain jurisdiction, right? There's a certain probability if I'm coming from outside the approved area, I'm going to miss opportunity, right? So we've now created a two-tier system where if I'm in the green zone, I have basically full-time access. And if I'm in the red zone, I have part-time access depending on who's producing blocks. That's problematic to, the very basis of some kind of decentralized global money is because politics is taking over access, right? And that's one of the biggest benefits, in my opinion, of cryptocurrencies as a whole is they allow global access, right? And that should be a fair game. Now, even if it's fee-based, at least it's fair in terms of everybody has kind of the same implications of fees, right? Versus, if you have that type of restriction coming online, you just have, it breaks the system in a way. So that bothers me a lot. And we're seeing that across major projects and nobody's really saying anything, which is weird.
All right. Well, good point. All right, let's get back to the technical. Cheese, I want you to explain it more simpler than you just did.
Okay.
Let's take another stab at it. Let's take it from a step, and explain the process as a miner of how it functions and what it may look like on my end to actually interact with these smart contracts? And do I have to put up anything like in advance, any sort of funds in advance to secure any sort of thing there, or how's that work? Let's try it really simple.
So
Put your deco hat on.
okay, so that is a complicated question again, but I'll try to make it as simple as possible. So from a miner's perspective, the goal for Lithos is to try and be as smooth as possible. We understand that miners kind of already have a bunch of infrastructure set up to work with things like Hive OS, um, uh, with Stratum, etc. All these different technologies and protocols that are made to help miners. We're trying to kind of fit into that same sort of space and make it so that's seamless for miners to kind of start connecting to the Lithos system of pools and get to decentralized mining. So I guess to begin, a miner would download the Lithos client. They'd be able to run it. They could connect their miner to a local stratum that is set up by the Lithos client, and from there,
So the
through the
Lithos clients will a node be included, or you do a node first, do the Lithos client, which puts Stratum in there on top of it, kind of thing?
So you would have a node with it. Our goal is to kind of integrate both of them into the same thing, sort of. Um, but yeah, you would be able to connect to the Lithos client and start mining from there. And for the miner, it should be as simple as putting in their address and one or two settings, and they'll be able to mine shares and start sort of contributing to blocks on the decentralized pool.
Okay, and is there any collateral involved? I saw something online recently where somebody tried to compare it to some sort of staking, and I think Joe or you came in and said, "Well, kind of, but not really, kind of," and that kind of thing. Is there any sort of collateral that the miners have to put up in first place to guarantee this?
No, so that is one of the initial problems we were dealing with was that with Lithos, we're using these collateralized mining pools that I mentioned earlier. But miners themselves, our goal is to not have them put up any collateral. So, and let me add, the reason for that is that we don't want to wall out new miners who have never mined the blockchain before. If you've never mined Ergo before and you want to join, we want you to be able to join a decentralized pool on the first chance. And you wouldn't be able to do that if um, Lithos required collateral from a miner beforehand. So to deal with collateralization, there is a way for miners or non-miners to set up collateral to be lended out to miners who can use that collateral to then mine a block. That would essentially allow the miners to produce the block by themselves, put up their own transactions, their own votes in terms of governance. And for the people lending that collateral, they would be able to gain a small pool fee, depending on what they set and what the miner agrees to.
And that borrowing for the miner is transparent to the miner. They're
Right.
not.
The miner would be able to choose what collateral they borrow. So it's up to the miner to decide what collateral they feel has the right risk reward sort of proportion to it.
And that'll be offered on some sort of interface in the Lithos client to choose from.
Yeah, there'll be an interface for it in the Lithos client. Obviously, it's just smart contracts in the end. So if somebody wanted to, they could do it manually, I guess. But yeah.
And just to clear up, there's no centralized Lithos server running anywhere. Everything's on the smart contract, and the Lithos client is interacting with those smart contracts.
Yeah, so I mean, Lithos is essentially the best way to think of it is sort of like a layer two, but there's absolutely no server or anything that would defeat the purpose of it, right? We're trying to do trustless things, so yeah.
All right, Joe. What are the implications beyond Ergo here? How does Lithos expand to other chains and give that offering to other chains? Does it still kind of exist on Ergo like Rosen Bridge does, or is it going to be built into other chains as well with their smart contracts?
Well, it seems as though it's going to be ergocentric. I mean, I'm sure the cheese would certainly have more insight into that than me. I'm not actually I've more said, hey, I want, cheese costs money and I want to keep them enthused, right?
Well, my question, nice play there. My question is more along the lines of your experience with Rosen Bridge and crossing chains
Sure.
and the ethos of essentially providing something back on Ergo that expands onto other chains and that kind of
No,
comparison.
there's a lot of use case there, right? It really depends, right? In terms of where we scale and ultimately how we grow. One thing that Alex and I have been talking about is this potential, with side chains, right? To potentially have, Sigma powered proof of work side chains. So then, there is some potential future where, if we build out multiple side chains, you may be able to run Lithos in multiple, environments. I can't say that couldn't happen, right? But to start with, sure, it's going to be on Ergo. There's certainly a lot of use for it, looking at how proof of work is kind of distributed across pools. Even something like Bitcoin is, there's a couple of entities that have majority control, right? And as things move, kind of more, I guess, with like Bitcoin in kind of this direction of financialization moving into more traditional markets, that, let's say, censorship resistance becomes a bigger question.
All right, I gotta stop for a second there because what you just said, I just need to clear up here. So you guys are saying that with side chains, essentially, you don't have to wait for somebody to be running a pool on a side chain to mine it. You could essentially set up the Lithos smart contract on the side chain, and then anybody who jumps on just runs up the Lithos clients and points to the smart contract, and they're mining. There's no pool you have to wait for. There's no anything else. You just go, essentially.
Yeah, it depends if Sigma is portable properly. These are kind of modular systems, right? So if you were to plug in a different function of proof of work in the base and you still run the same logic on top of it, you could have multiple Sigma chains that are all interconnected and all, would support, Lithos clients and a lot of other things that have been built in Ergo. We've already kind of seen this in like the EVM verse, right? Where you have multiple compatible chains, with kind of different consensus, different tweaks here and there. I would love to see something like that for proof of work because, there's a lot of computation and energy that's being used that's could be extended into DeFi in unique ways.
That's exciting. Damn. Cheese, what about this makes you excited enough to be like, fuck it, I'm dropping everything and I'm gonna do this?
Well, I mean, I think I've been working on decentralized pools for maybe 2 years now. Ever since I joined Ergo, that was kind of my first goal. When it was like Ergo Hack 2 or something. I forget which one. But I came in there and I decided to make the whole subpooling thing. And then somebody, I forget who, one of the developers told me that's not really a fully decentralized pool. So I'm like, okay, let me
Leave
make
it
an
to
actual
Ergo
one then.
to rain on your parade. Good job, buddy, but it's not quite there.
Yeah, I think it might have been MHS Sam, but I mean, he was right. It wasn't decentralized at the time, so I decided, all right, let me look into this and see uh, how I can build one. And I was actually able to pull a lot of resources from um, prior works from Kushti about collateralized pools, and even work from Nipapaus in terms of how Lithos determines work. Um, So yeah, I just think this is really important for mining in general. Right now, mining, as Joe said, it's dominated by few pools, a few powerful people who are able to potentially do whatever they want with your payments or with the actual blocks themselves that are ending up on the blockchain. So for a decentralized permissionless currency, you need decentralized permissionless mining.
All
Yeah.
right, so tell me what the draw is going to be here. How are we going to go out there in the world and say to these miners who are pool hopping potentially, jumping from pool to pool, whichever's making the most money at the time? How are we going to track these guys to Lithos? Is there something that can grab those people to use decentralized mining, or are we aiming for initially the people who really care about decentralization and really care about trustless interactions with the chain and not having to rely on a centralized entity to be paid. What market initially are we going to be pushing for with Lithos here?
Well, I think the people who care about decentralization will join Lithos inherently, as long as it's a decently good product, of course. But yeah, the real goal is to get as many miners as possible into Lithos, because that way those miners are able to have a voice in terms of the governance of Ergo, and they're able to contribute to Ergo in a way that doesn't necessarily threaten it. For example, through a 51% attack, or through the disrespect of miners that pools may do. So yeah, the goal is really to get as many miners as possible. To do that, Lithos itself, well, the good part of Lithos is that the miners themselves create their own blocks. So they can add in any MEV they want. They can add all the storage and transactions that they can fit inside their blocks. So that's extra ERG for miners. And of course, there will be a Lithos token that will be distributed to miners as they mine pools on the Lithos pool system. So that way, there's an extra incentive for miners to also join. So, I mean, in the end, miners are economically driven, and that's the rational thing to be doing, right? So, if you want to incentivize miners to join Lithos, then they're going to have to be economically driven to that.
Yeah, and I think that when you get into the FEMO side as well, like there's some tools we can add on top of that to add some kind of sweeten the cake a little bit. You know, in terms of like my perception, it certainly makes a lot of sense to add that as either the entire emission for just I don't know. There's certainly a good legal argument to make there. Like you're launching on top of a proof of work network, and therefore you're going to be, you know, more distributed than the proof of work network was in Genesis era, certainly. You know, then there's also this idea where you're adding security underneath your product, which long term has a lot of value. You know, and the truth is, miners kind of get the virgin erg, right? So naturally, they are in a nice position to be liquidity providers and participants in DeFi, because collectively they have a lot of power in terms of setting markets, creating markets. You know, it's something that you know, can be considered long term as well. But I certainly think we're going to see at least, you know, I'll push for you know, some fair initial mining offerings and ways to basically enhance the you know, economic draw of Lithos.
And did I hear correctly that, or maybe you didn't say this yet? Voting is similar to the old days, where the individual will change their own settings on their own stratum or node, and that's how they vote, essentially.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, the miners are the ones creating the blocks in Lithos, so they're the ones who choose the votes. They choose the transactions. Really, the whole goal is to, you know, bring power back to the individual miners rather than the pools that currently have it right now.
So can't pools though still group together and push towards this Lithos smart contract?
I mean, of course, you can have pools outside of Lithos that are still.
I don't mean outside of Lithos. I mean, if I'm running my own stratum, can I invite my friends to point towards my stratum and mine there too, so I have a much bigger hash?
I suppose you could, but well, then you would have less of an economic incentive to do so, because presumably you're going to be taking a fee for that, and the miners mining on your pool, they won't have the ability to choose the transactions they want. They won't have the ability to choose the votes they want. So what's the incentive there? Besides maybe getting rewards quicker, but even then, the way that NISPs work is that you should still be able to get pretty consistent rewards. So there might be some incentive to do that, but certainly not as much incentive as there is right now to try and manually pull up.
Gotcha. All right, we've got a couple questions on Twitter, and I want to pay attention to these because Joe made an effort to ask on Twitter some questions. So the first question from Ergo Minnow is ETA? Smiley face question.
2 weeks. No, I'm kidding. We're thinking about a year to year and a half of development. That's currently the goal. Obviously, things could change, and Lithos does rely on some changes to the Ergo protocol. I've talked with Kushti about them before. Hopefully, we can get them in V6. If not, we'll see what happens. But yeah, we're looking at a year to year and a half.
All right. Then we have the Conan with the sigma as the E and the. And actually the lowercase sigma as the O in Conan. They're very creative. So their question is: tell us about potential to disrupt mining pools on other POW chains, include advantages, requirements, limitations, barriers, etc. And example, would this end up being more profitable for the individual miner?
Yeah, so on other proof of work chains, I think it's pretty interesting. So I think Joe talked earlier about side chains and Sigma being able to run Lithos on those. So
Mhm.
yeah, that's absolutely true. But you can theoretically use Lithos to mine on other proof of work chains. Any standard proof of work chain that's using, the standard hash inequality um, can use Lithos. So anything like Bitcoin, Litecoin, Monero as well, I assume. They should all be able to be mined using Lithos. There are some big challenges there, definitely. I would say the biggest challenges in terms of that would be transferring the block headers and kind of verifying that um, a block made on that blockchain has ended up on Ergo so that it can be processed by the Lithos contracts. So that part's a little bit tough. Maybe I'll talk to the Rosen Bridge devs 2 years out from now. We can figure it out. But yeah, it's absolutely possible. And I think that's definitely big for Lithos in that it's chain agnostic and really any proof of work chain can benefit from it.
I mean, it's neat with these kind of things. It seems like there's going to be just from things like Rosen and all the watchers and running and Lithos with these kind of things. It seems like there's going to be a large increase in transactions going into the chain, increased at least with these alone, which is pretty neat. Makes us, make sure the chain can handle it and makes us look good as far as that goes. All right, one more question from this one's from Gray Man. Their question is: please examine the game theory of Lithos in the bear market, and as we grow into a bull market at some point, does it change the competitive landscape compared to the last bull run? So essentially, does Lithos give us something in this next bull run that we didn't have before? That's essentially attractive to people to join Ergo.
You want to answer, Joe, or should I?
Sure. No, sure. I definitely think that, when you look at proof of work profitability, right, it's always kind of swinging around based on market conditions. I think probably for like the miner, probably the largest interesting thing here is the ability to potentially have extended rewards through, mining project tokens or other various incentives in the system, right? That's kind of a big thing when you're talking about potentially breaking even or spec mining at a loss. It gives you additional potential let's say vectors of value in the portfolio that you're putting together. But proof of work is also something that tends to be quite competitive, right? When you're talking about input costs and profitability, and so that's not necessarily something that we can always fix, right? Like there was this weird time for I don't know, maybe a year or two where if you pointed any GPU at like Ethereum, it was printing money, and that kind of created an odd mentality that profitability was always going to be there in the short term, right? And that historically has not always been the case for mining. Usually, mining is somewhat of a mix of covering costs and speculation, building a treasury, learning to adapt to market conditions and emission adjustments. It's a complicated business, right? So I can't say that Lithos is going to make everybody profitable 100% of the time. I'll just be lying. But it can create additional tools, right? Even on Ergo itself, like the ability to have more engaged governance could lead to fee adjustments, right? That could potentially offset some, market conditions that are rough for miners. There's a lot of potential there. And then there's also the question in terms of like building products on top of Lithos, which is a long-term question. If you have, collateralized mining pools, can you, turn that into some type of product, right? It's hard to say. You might have people that come up with that, type of financial idea on top of collateralization. Let's see.
Yeah, I mean, I think to build off that, one thing I've sort of personally always thought that could be important is, proof of work DeFi and trying to get miners onboarded into, actual DeFi and interacting with the blockchain more. So that's one thing I hope Lithos will be able to help in that aspect, is getting miners on chain, interacting with the chain, because as Joe said before, they're sort of the initial liquidity providers, and they have a really sort of strong power with that they're not using at the moment. So I think having Lithos being on chain and sort of encouraging miners to interact with the chain will be a benefit long term for Ergo in general.
And I see it as a return to the original idea of how Erg is mined, essentially. You have you started out with a bunch of solo miners that have a GPU at home and they want to just go through they want to mine some coin when they're not playing a game or not running their business. And you can essentially return to that just with a couple clicks of the Lithos client and a node and Stratum built in there. You can do the same thing and not have to worry about bug and nano pool of why the payment hasn't gone through or why their damn dashboard is down or that kind of thing. So super cool return to the roots of what Ergo was, or is. Awesome. All right, let's jump into the dev update and then we'll return for some closing remarks. How's that sound?
Sounds good to me.
All right, let me hit my fancy switch button. Beautiful. You can't see it happening, but you'll see it when you don't watch the video. Joe, you don't watch your own videos. Maybe Cheese.
I don't watch my own either. So.
Oh, you guys.
I'll leave. It's one of those things. If I come in and someone else is watching it, I'll leave. Anyway.
All right. Why don't we have Joe start with the first one here?
All right, Rosen Bridge update. So we've been doing some R&D in terms of the Bitcoin network. First thing we need to do is build the scanner. So we've been going through different scanners, seeing what kind of load they do, how they do with fetching data, what'll make sense. Something we need to pay attention to with Rosen, especially because as the network gets more complex, so do the carry requirements, basically. It's kind of like your hardware scaling. We need to make sure that we don't make everything too heavy long term. So we were looking at one specific Explorer instance in Bitcoin and realized, hey, this probably isn't a great idea. So then we pivoted and found one that is better at basically uploading larger chunks of data. With the Rosen Bridge utils, we've implement the Rosen extractor based on the Bitcoin Explorer block Explorer API. So that's under review. Trying to find the right infrastructure that fits with what we want, basically. So then we get into Rosen Bridge RoseNet. Those of you that don't know, we have a P2P network kind of underneath Rosen Bridge that the guards are constantly communicating with each other, and we call that network RoseNet. Added some new packages for the node and relay. Worked on hole punching tests, trying to break our system, essentially. Discussing some issues internally in terms of how to potentially improve that. Started the research and development in terms of hardening that underlying system, making it more resilient to external attacks. Then Codagen is the last. Looks like we added a new NPM script, change all the initial versions to 0.0.0. Run tests before publish if the tests look good. And we're adding chain set support. And with the Rosen Bridge, let's see, chain set formatter. Looks like there's some work there. It's not really my department, so I don't have much to say.
Oh boy, that's awesome. All right, so what's it called? You mentioned during the AMA last week about how Rosen functioned just like it was supposed to, even though there was a small delay in one of the transfers. But you mind recapping that real quick for people
Sure.
who may have not
So
been watching the AMA?
we've implemented this idea of hot and cold storage, which is basically to minimize the incentive of attack, right? So Rosen has some preset configurations that basically, if something is larger than X, then it's not going to clear, and we kind of have to manually settle it. And the goal there is to minimize kind of the targeting of large funds. So it's a exchange strategy actually. When there's been multiple exchange exploits, they said, well, what's the best way for us to do that? And so then they, developed kind of the cold wallet strategy. So even if you were working with a central exchange and you were moving a large amount, you may run into the same thing where, periodically, they need to pause and top up,
That was a hell of a transfer out of the blue, that's for sure. Holy cow!
Yeah, I didn't see that.
100,000 ergs, bam! Very impressive. All right, Cheese, why don't you take the man himself, Kushti?
All right. So for the Ergo protocol and reference client R&D, Kushti got a fix in for the chain slice method. I think MGPie was talking about an issue with that. So 5.0.20 has been finalized, and he needs to add a README and get it reviewed. He has already started on 5.0.21. He's done more prototyping code for a merged mind sidechain. It's very exciting. Checking the most efficient Sigma map implementation, and he's planning subblocks rollout, and he wants to start with P2P messages and compact blocks like propagation based on subblocks. Then for Dexy, he tested the modified Spectrum UI, and it works, as well as the bank UI. So the next step will be to share it with the Gold Pool group members and then the Sigmanauts. Now there's a tutorial for bootstrapping the Gold Oracle pool and Dexy. Dexy sounds exciting. Can't wait for that.
Very cool. He posted the links to the UIs in the Gold Oracle channel, and I just need a little bit of testnet erg to try it out, but excited to give it a try. See if we can do some fake swaps. All right, we've got Sigmanaut Wombo with a Sigmanauts update. Sig's mining pool. Apparently, the lead dev on the Sig's mining pool is working towards getting storage rent implemented 2 weeks or soon. I wonder how that lead dev's doing on the Sig's mining pool storage rent. You guys wouldn't happen to know, would you?
I don't know who that guy is.
You might be busy on Lithos, huh?
Maybe, yeah.
All right. Gathered all market maker proposals going to be shared to discuss community for thoughts planned forward. Twitter space to be held for discussion soon. Date to be determined. So we decided not to do a Twitter space just because it's very, top down. So we said, fuck it. We're going to post the PDF with a brief description. The PDF is very descriptive. Cannon set it up, did a great job in main chat, and we'll say there's going to be a free for all chat for it at this time. So we're going to do it when this video comes out today, essentially Sunday morning at 15:30 UTC. I'll be there for a brief time, and Cannon and Austin as well. Hopefully Glasgow can pop in. Joe as well. You have a lot of experience with this too. If you're awake, probably not at that time. But
what time is it?
Your time? 7:30. No, are you 2 hours behind or 3 hours behind me?
I'm 2 hours behind you.
Oh, so 8:30. Oh, 8:30. You'll be up. You'll be second cup of coffee by then.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah. Worst case, if nobody wants to talk about it, we'll talk amongst ourselves on the channel. But the idea of this whole situation with market makers is we're Ergo. We have to play poker with our cards facing out, just like Joe says all the time. So we're going to tell you what's going on. We're going to be transparent about it, even the greasy stuff. So we'll see how that goes. So after that discussion, We're going to pump it through ChatGPT and get all the like responses grouped so we can see what the consensus was. Then we'll work on a proposal, and we'll put that proposal through a Sigmanauts vote first so that it's okay. And that proposal may end up asking for a loan from the EF. It may be asking for community funds. Who knows? We don't know what that looks like now. But whether it fails or it passes, either way, at least we have some data of what the community wants and wants to push forward with. And we can go from there. And maybe if it fails, the next person that tries it will at least have some data to go by to help them out. Open source community agreements. There we go. All right. Then we have testing ongoing with Paideia, and there's a link to the proposals right there. Paideia's so much. What a relief Paideia is. So great. Oh, look at this. Somebody's got an update by themselves. Go for it, Cheese.
All right, so development of Lithos has officially begun as of last week. So last week I started working on the initial Lithos client, going to be basing it off of Play framework. So I've used that framework before. It's really nice, has Akka and a lot of other libraries in it that are really helpful. So I'll be building the initial Lithos client with that. I'm going to be adding a stratum, likely based off the one that Aberg made in Java for Ergo, I believe. So I'm going to be adding a stratum into it, and really I just want to get it ready so that we can start testing Lithos as soon as possible, get all the smart contracts working, get some data on how the non-interactive shared proofs that we're going to be using, how we're going to parameterize them properly, etc. So right now we're just working on the initial client. And I added some finishing touches to a public roadmap, which is nice.
Awesome.
You know, it would be really cool. We spoke about this in the SIGs a little bit in one of the meetings. Is trying to get it easier for. I know nodes are super easy to run on Ergo. Okay, it couldn't be easier. If you're not comfortable with running a command line Java, you got Ergo that you just click a few buttons and you have a full freaking node. You know, it couldn't be any easier. But, you know, some people don't have the hardware, you know, they have a laptop or something and they have a phone and that's it. So the idea was that, you know, we went online and we found a bunch of $50 to $75 to $100 like little Intel Atom sticks, you know, with 4 gigs of RAM, like an Atom CPU or an Intel i3 CPU, those kind of things. And the thought was we could purchase these ahead of time, brand them, get an image, and just whenever somebody buys them, DD the updated image to it. They send it home, they plug it in, connect it to their Wi-Fi, and then they can just tunnel into it and do whatever they want. So my thought too, beyond that, I think it'd be even cooler to have the SIG sell something like a Lithos box. So $100, you get your box, you plug it in at home. There's your stratum. There's your Lithos box. You just point your rigs to your Lithos box, shut your rigs down, shut your gaming machine down. The Lithos box is still up. There's nothing you need to do to it, that kind of thing. So, you know, that'd be pretty neat, I think.
It's an interesting.
All right, let's see what else we have here. Oh, let me take the honors of doing this guy. Louis Vatra, when Paideia. He says he's mostly gathering things onto our to-do list. The extra activity that the SIGDAO brings helps a lot in testing things further. Yep, Mark said in the last dev update that he did with me that he's really put a shit ton of GitHub comments about the UI and things. I'm sure he's pissing off Louis for that kind of thing. Crux Finance accounting subscription setup is nearing completion. Slowly adding more features to the front end, such as accounting section with transaction overview for registered wallet address. And NFT marketplace, I have mostly been busy with dusting this one off and making improvements to the setup, so it's up to the requirements of a student. What the hell is NFT? Did I miss something? Is this an old project that he's digging up?
Yeah, he's had that. They've had that NFT marketplace idea for a while.
What's this? How is it different from like Sky Harbor or like full on eBay of auction house, Ergo auction house?
I don't know. I would love to see a type of eBay on chain.
I mean, that's Ergo auction house. That's kind of what we have there.
Yeah, we have that. You know, what was that? It was Open Bazaar used to be like the crypto based hub for a lot of you know, goods, services, etc. I've always thought that was one of the cooler application ideas. So, all right, let's see. Maybe it'll push in that direction.
I mean, true. Even with what's it called? Even with auction house right now as it is, you could essentially develop some sort of section where, let's say I want to sell a video card, I mint something with an image of the video card, so you're buying a NFT to rights of the video card, and then I ship it to you, kind of thing. Then when it arrives, maybe half of the payments given to me at first, and the second half is given. But of course, that stuff's all built on trust. But of course, eBay is as well, essentially. So
Yeah.
you know, that'd be pretty neat to use that as a physical / digital marketplace there. And what's it called? And Unreal just had a post the other day, right? 2 days. He built
Yeah.
like a Chrome widget, a Chrome extension that lets you know when you have offers in for things in your wallets. Super fucking cool.
Trying to move towards like the P2P exchange. Pretty cool stuff.
Yeah, damn cool. All right, why don't you take? Oh, perfect. Why don't you take THZ, Joe?
All right, so it looks like Mike's moved the main React front-end repo to Bitbucket. More in-depth integration with Jira, and I know that he's also working on a off-chain kind of music event that he's putting together. So I hope that we hear more about that in the future.
And if anybody's interested too, Mike took all his I don't know if it was the chats in his channel or all his GitHub pull comments, but he threw them all through ChatGPT and then asked it a few questions, and it spit out paragraphs of this really good text of like what THC is about, what Mike's about, and building it. So it's a really good read in the chat if you want to scroll up a little bit in the THC chat. I highly recommend it. All right, let's see. Go for it, Cheese. EXLE.
All right, so EXLE update from February 3rd. So they have the new front-end design that's done, and they're starting on the build of it. An Ergo community member was hired and did an amazing design. They lost their BE maintainer, so they spent the last week getting their local environment set up and fixing their 10-year-old Heroku account billing so that they can redeploy the backend. Sounds fun, but they're not a Scala Java dev, so they need contributors. So if you would like to contribute to EXLE, then go ahead and let them know. And the backend is done for crowd loans, and there's existing functionality for it. So
is that Chris writing through that account, guys? Do we know?
I'm not sure.
I have no idea.
Is Chris does Chris do any sort of dev work? Or is he not a dev at all? Chris Ray, I'm talking about.
I don't think he's dev. I'm not sure.
Okay.
But I don't think he's dev.
All right, we've got Cyberverse. Have you guys been following this? They've got a pretty cool game coming out. Mini game.
I've been watching a little bit. It's pretty awesome to see.
Yeah. Kilver's doing a stream later Sunday, so later today after you guys watch this. So here's the update log for the new game update that they went live on February 6th. They moved the nickname change method to an in-game payment system, introduced emotes UI. Oh, emotes, great. And functionality integrating comment and Cyberverse themed emote NFTs. We're going to get people emoting on our corpses in Cyberverse. Implemented a player profile UI featuring a Twitter link and trade button. Added in-game trading functionality for items in CYPX. Introduced the ability to set an owner's apartment as private or public. Ooh, nice. In private mode, only the owner can access the apartment, edit decorations, and use mining rigs. Well, that's important. In public mode, everyone can access the apartments. Added the first multiplayer mini game for 5 to 10 players. Wolf and sheep. I can see some fun things. You know that I watched a little bit of the demo of it, and it reminds me of the times like, you know, I went to college in the 1999 2000 2001 too, and back then we had our like Pismo PowerBook G3s Max, and we would play Quake 2 and Quake 3. You know, we'd stay at college late in the library and all land together and do that. Super fun. So these kind of mini games remind me of those, you know, simple kind of things, but super fun. It's the people that you play with in that kind of open environment that makes it more fun than the game itself, kind of thing. All right, increase the character count for in-game chat to 200 characters, included an energy indicator in the character selection menu, implemented various smaller fixes and balancing improvements. A more detailed update log can be found in the Cyberverse Discord's announcement chat. These guys just don't stop. It's insane.
Amazing to watch.
Yeah, absolutely crazy. All right, anything else? Oh, the X Space was fun. Joe, you subbed for Kushti that day. That was a lot of fun.
Yeah, I got tagged in last minute.
Yeah, I think that's it for the dev reading. Let me switch back to the 3-up menu. There we go. All right. What do you guys have for any closing words? Let's see. Anything. It doesn't even have to be about Lithos. Let's open it up to anything, boys.
Well, I actually gave Adberg a grant to build the Stratum in Java, so I'm super happy that something's coming of that.
No, that's cool actually. Yeah.
So is that essentially he's going to integrate it into Tergo so that solo miners can just click a button and go?
That was the plan long term. I'm not 100% sure where. I remember he ran into some roadblocks and got busy. That's all right, and it happens in life.
It does.
No, but I didn't know that until right now. So that's really great.
That's awesome. Damn. How far? Do you know how far he is in it? Cheese?
I'm not sure. I think he was testing it with MG Pi earlier.
Okay.
But
Yep.
if it's not done, then I would be happy to contribute because we definitely need it for Lithos. So I'd like to get it done as quick as possible. It'll definitely help with that so that it can be in Saturgo and it can be in the Lithos client eventually too. It's
Yeah,
really useful actually. So I think it's needed for the ecosystem.
And I could
Yeah.
see Aberg even integrating some sort of Lithos interaction into Satirgo at some point too. Why just have one interface for Lithos when you can, if you're comfortable with Satirgo and the full node wallet and you like that, click a few more buttons and have another tab on top and maybe have some interactions with there as well.
Yeah, absolutely. That'd be great. Would be easier for miners too. So
Yeah.
Well, I've always kind of hoped that we would end up with an easy full node that you could just put deployable packages on, whatever application you want to support or infrastructure. That would be awesome. So it's been a dream, let's say.
Well, this talk is exciting. This has got me really excited, guys. I love this kind of stuff that I don't know. Do you guys spend any time outside of Ergo? Because, I listen to these things that are happening in an Ergo and I tell myself, there's no way that other chains are this fast. I mean, did you hear what Bruno said last dev update?
I watched it, yeah.
You
So,
didn't you didn't even remember.
Well, I don't remember what exactly you referenced. You got to give me some sort of segue.
He said we were talking about why he designed why he worked with Ergo first for SigUSD with the JED protocol as
it's
opposed
more
to
of a science
Cardano.
project.
Yeah, well,
That's
he said the devs on Ergo are amazing and insanely fast. He said they did something in like 3 weeks or something, whereas on Cardano it would have taken like a fuck ton of time. And he said it. I have the quote somewhere. I posted it in the Sig
Yeah.
chat. I'm waiting for somebody to make a banner and post it. And
Yeah, especially especially back when SigUSD was being developed. They have better tooling though. I mean, that's one thing I have to give the Cardano ecosystem credit is their SDKs and languages have gotten a lot better since then. But yeah, Ergo's always kind of been like a science type project where I guess Cheese is a good example. He came in with a great idea and then someone said, "No, you can do it better." Right? I mean that happens a lot, but ultimately, iron sharpens iron, they say, right? So, that's a part of why, like, if you look at SigUSD itself on Ergo, it's like, okay, we really took a lot of thought into what's the Oracle look like and the smoothing there. And in other instances, things are not quite, let's say, the way you might want them. But those assumptions matter.
Cheese, give us something to close with. We're at 58 minutes and 26 seconds. About hit us up. Let's see if we can keep this under an hour.
Right. So I guess I'll just close with Lithos. So in general, we've started development. I'm really happy that we've been able to start. It's been a long time coming ever since GetBlock stopped. I think there's been a little bit of a hole in the mining for Ergo in general. I think GetBlock had a really strong mining community and it was able to represent a lot of Ergo miners in some way, and we lost that. So I'm really happy that Lithos is in development now. And in the end, my goal is to try and bring as much power back to the miners as possible. Make them make them use their tools to the full potential. Get that extra money from MEV, storage rent, etc. And yeah, I'm just really happy and excited for Lithos to come in this next year, year and a half.
I love it, boys. It's shit like this that keeps me pumped.
Yeah,
Keeps me coming back.
There's some point in this video, QX, where Cheese said, you can't have a decentralized digital money without decentralized block production. You got to scroll back and cut that clip. Me, I can't do it because I never watched anything that I'm on. So that's your homework.
All right, sounds good, guys. Thanks so much, and we'll see you around. Hopefully, we see you tomorrow in the chat, or
All right, have a good one.
today, I guess, with the video. Thanks, guys. Ciao.